And look, I guess, who would you say some of the biggest influences in your early career were?
Probably some of my managers, realistically. I had a couple that I worked for. Well, I had one guy I worked for almost 10 years. Great guy. Really influential. It was really, had a lot of great sayings.
Do you remember any of those?
He would say, things like, when somebody isn't doing what you expect, they probably don't know what to do, So, just really common sense, kind of human leadership.
Yeah. Good day, everyone, and welcome to Swivel Talk. I'm Simon Schifferle, your host for this exciting journey into the heart of the tech and software industry. Today, you'll get a 360-degree view of the tech and software world, while we dive deep into the minds of founders, executives, CTOs, and others in the industry. Each episode will explore the latest trends, groundbreaking innovations, and the stories behind the success of these tech leaders. So buckle up and get ready to swivel through the fantastic world of tech. And today I have the CTO of HitIQ here in Melbourne, David Erikson. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thanks a lot.
Well, look, we will jump straight into it. David, thanks again for jumping on. We want to jump into a bit of your background and your journey into sort of how you got to where you are today. So can you share a little bit about your background, what initially drew you into sort of the tech industry?
Yeah, a great question. I guess probably goes back. I used to love to take things apart and, work on my car and, in high school and whatnot. Went to college, loved physics, took some engineering courses and went from there. So I started in semiconductors, worked at Intel, National Semiconductor, AMD, so built all sorts of great things, and then moved into medical devices after that.
Yeah. Lovely. And what would you say some of your key milestones were in your career before sort of coming here to Australia?
I think it's just been an evolution. You kind of start off with working in your discipline. I started in electronics, building hardware and ASICs and whatnot. And then from there, moved on to managing projects, more broader things, and then teams of people.
Yep. Yeah.
Architecting things, pretty standard progression, I think.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and look, I guess those sort of hand in hand going from, building and working with the hardware itself and then being like, oh, what's the software that sort of goes in to this sort of style? Is that sort of...
Yeah, well, so I guess a lot of the systems I worked on had a software component, a hardware component, and then eventually mechanical, and then ultimately moving more into cloud systems, mobile apps, web apps.
Yeah, amazing. And look, I guess, who would you say some of the biggest influences in your early career were?
Probably some of my managers, realistically. I had a couple that I worked for. Well, I had one guy I worked for almost 10 years. Great guy. Really influential. It was really, had a lot of great sayings.
Do you remember any of those?
He would say, things like, when somebody isn't doing what you expect, they probably don't know what to do, So, just really common sense, kind of human leadership.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And look, I guess with that sort of leadership, did you see a style of leadership that really sort of drove you to become a leader yourself?
So I've read a bunch of books, right? And so, I think probably like the servant leadership style is probably what resonates with me most.
Yeah.
I think that people have, good intentions and want to succeed. And so as a result, if you just enable them really, then generally they'll do great work. So.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And look, I guess in terms of some big projects and roles that significantly shaped your professional path as well, have you got a couple of those that you could give us an ear in?
Yeah, I guess going back, I've architected some ASICs, things like that, co-architected, architected some medical big systems that were kind of fun, electrosurgical generators, led the teams to build some of those things as well.
It's like those circuit generators, what do they sort of go in? Is that like more?
So it goes into surgical suites. So I worked at this company in Boulder, Colorado, and they basically were one of the founders of, solid state electrosurgical generators back in the day, in the 60s, and they advanced the ball. But yeah, these systems were used in probably 80 to 90% of surgeries around the world every day.
Yeah.
Right. So they basically make a 427 kilohertz sine wave at about a couple kilovolts, up to 10 kV. And so they're pretty sophisticated boxes with some really interesting analog and digital hardware, signal processing, a lot of software, all sorts of stuff. So
yeah, very above my head and knowledge right there, but it sounds large.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, that's great. And look, I guess you've been in a lot of different industries and a lot of different companies and countries as well. And what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in your career, and how did you sort of overcome them as well?
Career challenges. I guess probably the main thing is staying, abreast of, changes, keeping on top of technology trends. And I think there it's really just being aware, reading, talking to people, doing the I think it's pretty normal, self-education along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And being that self-education, would you say, always reading the news on what's coming up in the, in new technologies and that? Or?
Yeah, I think there's, I would say, general awareness around, read the magazines, that kind of stuff. But also one of the things I encourage really all my teams is read books.
Read books.
Right? Yeah. And it's actually really interesting how few people actually do read books. But, I always tell people, read a business book, read a pleasure book, read a business book, read a pleasure book, and, aim for one a month. Right. And if you do that, you'll be ahead of all your peers.
Yeah. I've got to take that advice. I have been reading a book for the past sort of 3 months, but I've started getting better. It took me 5 years to read one book, and I restarted 3 times, and now I've read 4 books in 2 years, which in my head, I'm like, yes, look at that. And my partner, she's read 45 books.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, okay, all right, I need to start to pick up the pace a little here. And look, I guess for yourself, it's a major sort of learning experience for you. How do you sort of see a major learning experience like guide you into your next sort of role or choice in sort of project that you work in?
So I'll probably answer that a little bit differently.
Yep.
So I think that thinking about how you shape your career, your pathways, those sorts of things. I think it's pretty common to start out in your own discipline, but I think from there, taking any sort of management role, project management, people management, and then trying to branch out into covering other disciplines and whatnot is, I guess, the pathway to, growth ultimately.
Yeah.
I think that's been what's been successful for me. So in terms of, specific challenges, I guess my background's been pretty organic. It's, it's been more of, being prepared, learning along the way, and then ultimately being capable to take on the next thing. So I think it's again pretty typical, I think, for most people as they climb up through their through the ranks and over their career.
Yeah. No, lovely. And look, I guess from there we're going to transition a little bit into the move from the US to Australia here. So obviously it's a really big part of your life, changing countries. I've done it a few times as well, and sort of understanding how the culture sort of works and the way work works while you're over there. So I guess what I wanted to understand is what are some of the biggest differences you've noticed between the tech industry itself in the US and here in Australia?
I think that there's probably in the U.S. more access to funding, things like that. Certainly bigger populations, bigger markets, all of that. So I think that it's actually easier to do a lot of things in the U.S. than it is here.
Yep.
I think access to funding here is a big challenge for a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
And I think that people wind up doing things like listing on the ASICs way too early and whatnot. But anyway, culturally, it's very similar, right? In terms of the, people are, there's good people everywhere, right? There's smart people everywhere. I think one of the things that's interesting here is people tend to be, I wouldn't say broader, but in the U.S., there's more specialization of your role, whereas here people tend to cover a broader area. They don't necessarily go as deep in the areas, but they certainly cover more breadth.
Yeah. So would you say that's a bit of an opportunity to sort of seek out if you want to be able to work in multiple different areas while having a role, but being able to, be able to, wear multiple different hats, or is that something that might be a little bit of a downfall?
It's just different, I would say. I wouldn't cast it as good or bad. I think that people here are probably oftentimes able to cover. I guess it's easier to build maybe small companies with just a few people.
Yeah.
Just because people tend to cover a lot more. And I'm thinking about electronics right now. But yeah, you just see, people that can cover wide ranges of things. But at the same time, you see in the U.S., I think more people that have a greater depth in areas.
Yeah.
That's been my experience.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I guess in terms of where Australia is in the tech landscape, how far behind do you reckon we are compared to, say, Europe or America or any of the other sort of big tech nations?
I wouldn't cast it as behind either.
Yeah.
It's probably, I think it feels a little bit harder here to actually build to go from that really tiny company to the next level. I think that there's probably a mix of competition over talent, and as well as just experience, and then mix that with funding, and then trying to find people that have, I'll say, broad business experience to actually work with.
Yeah.
I think that there's probably more business depth in the U.S.
Yeah. And look, I guess on that as well, do you reckon the move to Australia impacted your sort of career growth at all, and like better, or maybe kept it sort of slowed it down a little bit? Or
I think it's just different. I think if in the U.S. there's a lot more big companies, right? So here there's a few big companies and there's a gazillion tiny companies, right? And there's probably fewer in the middle. I think that one of the things in the U.S. I work predominantly in large companies, right? 10,000, 100,000 people, right? And here, biggest one had 100 something, 150 people in it maybe. So
that's classified as a big company here, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's tiny. That was like the one little group I worked in Colorado as part of AMD, right? So
yeah, and I guess that brings back to the having that access to being able to work in multiple different roles, because the company is a big company here in Australia, but it doesn't have a huge amount of people. So you've got to be able to assist another team or have some extra skills to be able to, push the company forwards and meet the goals that the company is sort of looking for as an employee of that company. Yeah. Yeah, no, lovely. And look, I guess what we'll jump into is more of the challenges and pressures of being a CTO as well. So what are some of the biggest challenges you face as a CTO, and how do you manage them?
Well, I think like any leader, person manager, you always have the hiring challenges, I think it's working with people is pretty straightforward. So I think having a staff that's happy and really a quality team where people are learning and enjoying themselves, I think that's generally, I've pretty achievable. So beyond that, I think most of the challenges I run into here predominantly are more around more product management, in terms of the teams here can build you anything, right? But it's a question of, are you building the right thing? Have we done the, I call it like MBA 101 type stuff, the market analysis, the competitive analysis, business cases. Do we actually understand what it is we're going to go build and why it will be successful? Or at least we have a thesis as to why it will be successful before we build it. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people here that have the talent to build pretty much just about anything. I mean, I built all sorts of crazy things here, X-ray machines and some avionics and a bunch of software systems. So you can pretty much, accomplish what you need to. It's a question then of, did you build the right thing? I think is really, really probably the bigger challenge in a product market fit value proposition.
Yeah. And I guess going into that, did you build the right thing is a bit, when you work in a company, you put so much in there, but there's still so much to go, but you end up sort of finishing. Do you keep an eye on that business that you worked in to sort of see how that project?
Yeah. So I still keep up with, a lot of people I've worked with over the years. So, it's just always interesting to see how the things that you worked on or you built or dreamed up turned out.
Good. Have you ever bought anything of the products that you ever previously worked on and been like, actually, this is,
I built embedded chips, right? So, and then, some medical things. So we wouldn't buy those, but, I probably haven't owned anything that I've ever built.
Yeah.
Might have a prototype or two at home.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And what about the mouth guards at HitIQ? Have you got one of those?
Oh yeah. I actually want everybody on the team to have one.
Yeah.
They're we use them for testing, building new features into them.
Yeah.
Like we have a bunch of prototypes that we built that we actually haven't released that have all sorts of features and things that we're trying out. Building either a sensor for or some algorithm to process some data, turn it into something useful.
Yeah. And it's great to test it at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, during COVID, right? Everybody's working from home. So you had to basically give everybody stuff to work with. So, positioning that so that people can work at home. I think actually having that flexibility for staff and continuing that, I think has merit.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of unfortunate that some companies are making a push hard back into the office.
Yeah, and some of the big companies are doing that as well. I guess that's sort of coming into what I was going to ask. I guess that innovation and that as well. Do you reckon that sort of is good to sort of have your own sort of area where you're by yourself to be able to create innovation, or would you say a mixture between coming into the office and meeting with the people?
I think that as long as you foster an environment where people do collaborate, either face to face or through various medium like Zoom or whatever, right? That I think the interaction has value.
Yep.
But I don't think you have to force it one way or the other.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I guess talking about sort of like common sort of topics as well, what's sort of a discussion among peers in other businesses and or other CTOs that are out there as well? What's sort of the main topic that you guys discuss?
So the big it's been dominating the everything for the last year or two. AI, and really, what can you use it for? How do you use it? I think it's kind of funny. I guess unless you're building like a big LLM or something like that, people talk about AI, but I think everybody's basically using trained ML systems for deployed products. I think that people are trying to get into the productivity aspects of the various LLMs, code reviews, suggesting things, maybe summarizing something. But yeah, so I think there is some value in that. I heard a talk the other day about somebody, they said they sped up their velocity in their development by, well, they put 30% on the slide, but they said 50%. So pretty dramatic.
Yeah. And with the US elections that have just happened, how much AI do you reckon was built into that whole production that went for 24 hours of that? It was insane.
Yeah, it was insane. So yeah. Well, anyway, I think it was a French philosopher that said countries get the leader they deserve. So anyway.
Yeah, it was a very interesting watch yesterday. We had it on the TV.
Yeah, so
it was like a giant football match, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And look, I guess on that AI sort of space, how do you reckon it will shape the future of technology? And what are some of the key considerations that a CTO or any business owner should sort of watch out for in this space?
So I think that there's some definite issues and questions around data leakage, IP leakage, and you can manage that by appropriate access to the right models and whatnot. If you punch everything into free Chat GPT, well, of course you're effectively giving it away for training purposes. So
yeah,
I think there's obviously some like AI ethics things to deal with. Bias, there's a lot of literature out there on those points, but having an eye on that. But I think those are the areas that I'm thinking about. We put an AI policy in recently that was really mostly about leakage of our own IP out in, don't use the free ones, use the one that we contracted with, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't train on our data sets.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Yeah. And do you use AI in your personal life as well? Because I know a lot of people are using it.
I on occasion.
Yeah.
I've used it for a few things, mostly just to see what it can do. And it's actually really impressive. Like we've tried to, I've had to write some emails and, see if it can improve a document or something like that. Had to plan a trip to New Zealand just for kicks.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's remarkably capable.
Yeah. I use it for my quick Google searches now. Instead of having to scroll through Google, I just ask it what's this doing with the weather, and it goes this, and I'm like, oh, that's the exact answer that I wanted. I do not know if it's right. I've got to go to Google to then fact check, but I'm like, no, I'll take that answer.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Some of the the hallucination problems are interesting. I heard somebody talking about they were using it for an application, but in their actual product.
Mm-hmm.
I forget which model they were using, but they hadn't deployed it fully open loop yet, so they still had a human in the loop on the way that their customers interacted with the LLM.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So it went to the AI first and then went to the human, or
it had a certain level of review, or maybe it was audit. I'm not entirely sure,
mm-hmm.
but they didn't fully trust it, and they also told their customers we're still building this thing. So
yeah, no, definitely, no, interesting. And look, I guess current tech trends as well outside of AI itself. Is there anything in the industry that is exciting you most, or that you're really excited to sort of see or get your hands on?
I think at this point, I'm actually still excited about what we're doing at HitIQ. I think that we have some really amazing technologies and capabilities. It's funny because I talked to friends who were working in other companies, and when I talked to them about our cloud infrastructure, I think I haven't run into anybody other than smaller businesses that can actually build a cloud first architecture. So I think we're actually doing remarkably well there. It's all serverless. It's all infrastructure as code. It's really elegant, really simple. And we don't, low cost, right? So
Yeah.
It's interesting just to contrast with, people that are just doing lift and shifts out of data centers. And
Yeah. No, I think, look, HitIQ, being a sports medical, it's improving the way that people look after themselves, and you can identify, high impacts and look after your body and all that. I think, for that to be you really looking forward to seeing that, coming, getting bigger and coming out. It's really cool. Like I follow it day to day. I talk to a lot of people about being like, this thing is cool.
yeah, well, I think it's important actually. There was an inquiry in the Australian government into concussion in sports, and it's clearly an issue, right? Not just at the professional level, but in the community. And so, one of the areas that we're working towards is deploying our technology that's used by professionals around the world into community sport. And so that, I think that initiative, that the products that we're building can bring a lot of value around monitoring people playing contact sports. We're currently in Australia at the consumer level, but we're gonna go broader as we go forward. So I think that the consumer community level sport opportunity, really to make a difference in people's, health outcomes, hopefully, in the long run, I think is really important. I just reflect back on, playing football in high school and college, and, that there was a study in Nature Communications year or two ago, and the number that sticks in my head was, it was 30% of the people that played 7 years of American football had some level of CTE.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's a shocking number, right? They had grades of grade 1 to 4. It was, still relatively.
Yeah. It's the same here in the outside of the AFL, just in your local clubs.
Yeah.
Like there's probably more high impact in those than you do in the AFL because it's so watched. And that's probably, very important to bring it into those.
Yeah, there's just different characteristics in footy or AFL, Aussie rules versus rugby versus American football. The characteristics, the number of impacts that people experience over a practice or a game differs, but they all share a lot of really common elements as well. So the exposure risk is there for everybody in all these sports.
Yeah, definitely. And look, me coming from playing a AFL footy background up in Albury, there it was I wouldn't know that I had multiple head concussions while I was up there.
Yep.
How many I had, can't remember, but there was a lot. There was at least one a game that I'd get a good knock. So yeah, I think what you guys are doing is very impressive, and it's going to save a lot of lives.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that we've done that I think is actually really cool is one of the products. It basically connects parents and coaches and the teams to basically identify kids that have had an incident, and then connects them through a telehealth system so that they can actually get a qualified concussion, GP expert on the line pretty quickly.
Yeah.
After an incident, be it a practice, doesn't matter where they are. They could be out in the Kimberley and still access somebody, pretty much immediately. And we've had some really great results from that from customers.
No, amazing. And look, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it all keeps tracking as well, and going from Australia and going globally, and it's a very exciting space, and there's been a lot of talk about it. A lot of people know about HitIQ, so it's very exciting to sort of see what you guys are going to do in the future. And look, I guess going into that as well, industry trends, all that. Where do you think the industry is going to sort of sit in the next sort of 5-10 years? Do you reckon everyone is worried about losing their jobs and stuff like that to AI, but I sort of think that it will improve jobs as well. It's sort of like when paper went to computer.
Yeah, I think everything has its pros and cons. Things that are creative also can be destructive along the way a little bit. But I think it just changes things. but you've seen that, over, hundreds of years too, right? New technology comes in and things adapt.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's anything new here in that regard.
Yeah, no, perfect. And look, I guess some advice from yourself. What sort of advice would you give to someone who's looking to start or advance their career in technology?
Yeah, interesting. I guess to start, go to uni. But I think I always recommend that people focus on getting a core engineering capability, electronics, mechanical, software, whatever, right? And then from there, go work in that discipline. And I think that there's merit, particularly if you're starting out your career, to if you can, work in a big company. And then I think there's merit at some point in your career working in a startup. Being in a company with 5-6 people and, having to basically not only design everything and plan everything, but take out, the rubbish and, work with legal and, the whole shooting match. And then from there, I think you're pretty well positioned. I think the other aspect, and we already talked about it, and I don't think people practice it enough, but learn, read, study. I think that that's an important thing that it makes a big difference in your own self-education over time. So your preparation. So I think those two are probably the main recommendations.
Definitely. And you've mentioned books and reading a few times. Have you got a couple of books that you would recommend?
So many.
That you would put in your top 2 of being able to, grasp in the learning space?
I just reread one recently. It's called Upstream Marketing. I forget exactly, something like that. But it's a really good description of how to think about planning understanding what a market needs and planning a product to service that market. But I think in classic engineering sense, having some process awareness, I would actually hope that a lot of the people who are working predominantly in hardware have awareness of things like standards, and can hopefully they know 62368 or whatever, pick your favorite standard out there that applies to your widget you're building. But and actually, I think that that's actually one of the gaps that I've encountered quite a bit in Australia is a lack of regulatory awareness, both at the business level and at the engineering level.
And how would you say someone can go about sort of learning about that? Would it be jumping on websites or listening to podcasts or reading a book? What would be the best way?
I think if you obviously if you have the standard, through your company, or if, I probably wouldn't buy it myself, but read them, understand them, and I think it's really interesting to do an intellectual teardown of your own product. While thinking through how the standard works and applies to that product. And if you don't know, go talk to, find somebody, have a chat with them, and try to understand it. Because there's certain things that can be challenging, and varying interpretations of things. But I think that's it's a skill that's worth developing. If you're going to build products.
Yeah, of course. Is that? Would you put that out to someone who's out there trying to build their own little app to design?
Not so much software per se. I think if we're going to talk about software, probably things around some of the, I guess, process, assurance aspects. How do you know your thing actually works, right? How can you prove that it does what you say it does? That's one of the things we're working with Swivel on currently is testing some HitIQ software, right? And so that quality engineering element, I think, is an important piece of the puzzle, and I think it's often overlooked until either something goes wrong, or until the company's big enough, or it relies on people having, I guess, prior knowledge and expectation that that's something that's actually needed to build a quality product.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I guess making sure that things are tested before they go live is obviously a very important part.
But it's not just tested. There's methodology in how you test and how you think about testing and coverage and how you construct your tests and also your requirements and traceability and those sorts of aspects are. There's a methodology behind all of it.
Yeah, definitely. And every testing or product that you're doing would have a similar methodology, but it'll be structured in a different way to meet what that sort of.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the most abstract, you can view everything as a systems engineering methodology. That's kind of how I look at the world these days. Is whatever you want to describe it, V model, right?
Yep.
What are your requirements? How do you architect it? Design it, implement it, unit test, integration test, system test. Yeah. So verify and then validate it.
Yeah.
Throw a risk analysis on top, probably some FMEA, things like that, and hopefully some usability analysis or human factors.